Hello, I am Daisy, your hostess, and you are in my book playlist, where in this video I'm introducing a new book to the channel, and it's titled Dominion and Power, or The Science of Life and Living by Charles Brodie Patterson. Now, a little background on this author. He was a New Thought publisher, author, and editor, and he established the Metaphysical Alliance of Hartford. He opened the Alliance Publishing Company in New York City, and at the time of his death, he was named as one of the New Thought movement leaders. It was the title Dominion and Power that attracted me to looking into this book, and hopefully it'll be something that maybe we can grab some golden nuggets, as I usually recommend for all of you and myself. Sometimes we need to put all our preconceived notions about religion, about philosophy, about life, put them on a back shelf and have like that sit down with the author and allow him or her the opportunity to share their point of view. And in that, we can then very safely chew on their words. We can digest what they're sharing. And in that sense, we can safely weigh our beliefs and see if, hey, this is something that, resonates with me, or I could look into this more and see how it relates to me. As we get started into these next pages, particularly in this video, the author does mention that we need light, more light, and he starts that in his preface. And interesting that 100+ years later, well, guess what? We need light, more light, as if our morals and our values have totally changed. And some of you may agree. Things are not as they were yet. In a sense, deep down within us, I do agree with what the author said. The author said something that our knowledge of earth life is not eternal knowledge, but it's temporal, of the things of here. And everything is relative to where we are in life, what we're personally experiencing. So it's like everyone has a tailored experience of life. In this chapter, chapter 1, he's going to talk about the 3 planes of existence. And these planes are the physical plane, the mental plane, and the spiritual plane. And I don't know about you, but I don't argue that there are different planes of existence. Even when we think, have you heard someone say, well, you're in your head? Well, you're somewhere, your minds are rolling, you're living a moment in time, not out here, but through a story that's in your head. So, that makes sense to me, that we have multipleness to our existence and our human experience. So getting more knowledge about our world and our being, how we operate in it, this book definitely seems to be up my alley, Dominion and Power. But the question is it dominion and power overall, or dominion and power over ourselves? The science of life and living. So I hope that we're going to, get some golden nuggets out of this. I do encourage you, please do give me your feedback. I'd like to know what you think. And maybe through this, we can engage a dialogue on the commentaries. So please sit back and enjoy. Dominion and Power, or The Science of Life and Living by Charles Brodie Patterson. This book is in the public domain. Preface. The prayer of the world today is for light, more light. The mind of man is reaching out for a more comprehensive knowledge of the laws which regulate and control life. There is a wave of spiritual thought and feeling that is extending to the uttermost parts of the earth. While the ancient faiths are passing away, and man no longer accepts his religion because of the authority of any book or dogmatic creed, yet there is a new authority coming into life, such as the world has never known, save in rare instances. The authority is the realized presence of God in the individual life of man, where one feels with the heart and knows with the mind, and is not in any way dependent upon any or all authority. The way of life is illumined by the light within. The kingdom of God is found as a conscious reality in the soul of man, and the individual soul becomes conscious of both dominion and power and rules its own kingdom. This little book is written with the fervent desire on the part of the writer to throw some light on the way of life, or perhaps, better still, to call into conscious existence latent powers of being that are resident in the soul of every man that cometh into the world. If it fulfills this object to one or to many souls, it has accomplished its mission. If it tends to make the burdens of life lighter by bringing new joy or hope into any life, it will more than repay the author for the time and labor expended in writing it. Faithfully yours, Charles Brodie Patterson. Note to the 7th edition. Dominion and Power has been thoroughly revised and enlarged and contains 7 new chapters, forming, as the author believes, a book which will prove more comprehensive and profitable to the reader than the former editions. The author desires to express his thanks to the public as well as the press for favors shown former editions and trusts that the present one may merit their continued approval. Part 1. 3 Planes of Development. A quote by Browning. The glorious creature laughed out even in sleep, but when full roused, each giant limb awake, each sinew strung, the great heart pulsing fast, he shall start up and stand on his own earth. Then shall his long triumphant march begin. Thence shall his being date. Thus wholly roused, what he achieves shall be set down to him. When all the race is perfected alike as man, that is, all tended to mankind, and man produced, all has its end thus far, but incompleted man begins anew, a tendency to God. While the law of evolution, as explained by its discoverers, tends to clear up and make plain many phases and conditions of things hitherto unexplainable, there are yet numberless things shrouded in mystery. If we accept the law of the survival of the fittest as conclusive, we must consider nature as being in one sense thoroughly heartless. That is, that natural law decrees the destruction of all that is weak and the preservation of all that is strong. Yet for countless ages there has been a constructive work going on, having for its aim the perfecting of a habitation for living creatures, beginning with the tiniest conceivable, each habitation becoming ever more complex and complete. Hence, what we see in the phenomena of growth is not the destruction of life at all. It is the destruction of imperfect form, in order that the inner living entity may begin anew the construction of a more ideal body. This process continues until each form is complete and perfect, when a new type is evolved, because there is mind action in even the very lowest forms of life. When nourishment is required, there is intelligence enough to draw or to cause the entity to reach out after the needed sustenance. And if nature has not provided the means of locomotion, the latent powers of the creature are then forced into activity. I believe the time is near when the scientific world will perceive that the law of evolution is not sufficient in itself to explain the why and wherefore of life in its varying conditions and forms, and that the so-called law of natural selection will have to be discarded and another substituted that will not work injury to the law of evolution, but explain it more fully. A law that will take into account a supreme intelligence seeking manifestation through a multiplicity of ideals. A law that will demonstrate that the ideal is always first and the expression of it last. The law of evolution deals with effects, at no point entering the realm of causation. The higher law, of which evolution is but the outer expression, will only be understood when we go to the fountainhead of things, when we seek knowledge of causes. Knowledge coming to us in this way will give the real key with which to unlock the secrets of the external world. The one who would know must begin with causes, and through them explain effects. The law of involution first, the law of evolution last. The immanent God, the indwelling spirit, the ideal seeking expression. When John the Baptist said, God can raise up of these stones children unto Abraham, he did not mean an external power, but an infinite and eternal energy pulsating even the very stones. This is not a dead universe, but one that throbs with life from the very heart to the circumference. The universe lives and moves and has its being in God. Our knowledge of earth life is not eternal knowledge. It pertains to temporal things. Through its right application, however, we are enabled to develop the knowledge that is latent within each of us. This is not accumulated wisdom, but rather the potentialities of soul and mind. The enduring qualities of human life pertain to the soul. In the first place, let us consider the ideal man as a spiritual being animated by the Spirit of God, controlled and directed by a divine intelligence. The microcosm, the very image of likeness of God, in whose life is contained an infinity of possibilities reaching from the lowest earthly conditions to a realization of oneness with God. From conditions wherein sin, sorrow, and sickness weigh down and burden the life to that absolute sonship wherein the soul, triumphant, has dominion and power over all things. We may not postulate the birth of the soul, but we can trace its history through its earthly pilgrimage. Although the spiritual man is first in reality, yet, when we come to deal with man from the phenomenal or the evolutionary point of view, we must necessarily begin with the physical or animal man. The animal that is more subtle than any beast of the field, because this man is in reality the summing up of the whole animal kingdom. He is also the epitome of all the intelligence that controls and directs the animal kingdom. Every characteristic found in any of the lower kingdoms can be found in man, so that when man looks out on the visible world about him, he is looking on a picture of what he is or what he has been. There is absolutely nothing that has not its correspondence in his own conscious life. In the purely physical stage of development, man, to a very great degree, is governed by the same law that controls and directs the life of the animal. If he conforms to the law of this lower plane, he is comparatively well and happy. It is not as yet essential to his well-being that he have conceptions as to his relations to God and humanity. Moderation and temperance are, however, qualities necessary for his physical health. If whatever mind he has developed is comparatively free from the passions of anger, hatred, and strife, if the life is in a state of control so far as it has developed, it makes no difference whether religious ideas have as yet found place in his mind. Obedience to this law of moderation in all things brings health and happiness as a natural result. The requirements for this plane of development being so few and simple, more people are found here well and strong than on the higher and more complex planes. From him to whom little is given, little is required. At this stage of life, instinct, it can hardly be called intuition, is the guiding factor rather than thought or reason. But even at this early period in man's life, a higher consciousness is demanding recognition. There is something pressing from the center of his being that cannot and will not be ignored. Dim though it may be at first, as time goes on, it becomes more and more a controlling and directing force. Instinct gives way to thought and reason, and man enters the second plane in his evolution. A new world is opened to his vision, and the work of reconstruction is begun. I would not be understood as saying that any marked change takes place at any given moment, because in all probability, the change is a gradual one. It may be like the bud that has been swelling for days or even weeks, when, lo, in the twinkling of an eye, the blossom is unfolded. Doubtless there is a time when man first realizes the consciousness of a thinking, reasoning power as something distinct from and even superior to the sensuous animal life. He now finds himself between two planes of existence, the things that appeal to him from the purely physical side and the appeal that comes to him from his dawning intellectual powers cause a conflict that never ceases until the spiritual supremacy in life is attained. It is really at this stage that a distinct sense of what is termed good and evil enters man's consciousness. In the light of the new development, desires and habits acquired on the lower plane are looked upon as hindrances to intellectual progress. The struggle between living a new life and dying to the old one has begun, because life on this phenomenal plane of existence is one of constant change. The things that we live and believe today pass away, and behold, on the morrow, a new order for men mount on stepping stones of their dead selves to higher things. Not that the old has been evil, but with the coming of the new there is a larger interpretation. New ideals enter the mind, and failure to live up to these higher ideals constitutes sin, or lack of conformity to one's knowledge of law and order. Every new and larger ideal of life brings with it increased responsibilities, and the failure to meet these responsibilities brings about a state of mental unrest and dissatisfaction, which in turn finds expression in the physical organism, first producing weakness, then disease. We must regard man as a unit. The soul is not separate or distinct from mind, for mind is its offspring, the something wherewith it becomes related to the phenomenal universe, as the body is in turn related to mind. What the mind thinks, the body becomes, and when the mind thinks its noblest and truest thoughts of life, the body responds by giving external expression to those thoughts. Mind is related to life in two ways. We might say that it stands between the phenomenal universe on the one hand and the unseen world of causes on the other. In the first stages of its development, it turns almost exclusively to the outer, believing that reality is to be found there, as well as everything needful to satisfy its life, having as yet little, if any, knowledge of the spiritual force or power that gave it being. We now have what might be termed the carnal mind, or the mind not yet illumined by the indwelling spirit. We cannot look to the purely spiritual side of life from the animal plane and account for success or failure from that point of view, but we must go right to the physical, to man's sense nature, to find the determining point. Take two individuals, then, in whom the sense nature is equally developed and who possess a perfect development of the animal functions. We find in one case a degree of moderation, that is, a certain amount of temperance in the use of material things, which is missing in the other. Again, we find that one has a degree of perseverance that is not possessed by the other. The purely animal quality known as instinct is not a much higher attribute when manifested by man. But when man accepts the guidance of his instinct, he is led into the right course of action. When a man tries to do a thing and persists in the effort, even after repeated failures, his success is inevitable. It may at first seem very difficult, yet his instinct forbids discouragement. On this plane of existence, we find men who are most successful, who develop and express genuine power because they follow its true lines. Even on the physical plane, therefore, we find that the man who uses both moderation and perseverance accomplishes more than the one who is lacking in either of these qualities. Little by little, the man who uses moderation in all he undertakes, who perseveres and keeps firmly in mind the thing he wishes to accomplish, is certain to succeed. Moreover, because of the concentration of his force, he is becoming strong mentally and physically, for mental strength is manifested in and through the physical. The other sort of man becomes weaker each day instead of stronger, and finally nature abandons the attempt to utilize his powers in her economy. We say that a tree is cut down because it encumbers the ground. This means that the life that has come into existence has not used its intelligence to its fullest capacity, that it must go out of its physical form and later begin the work of construction anew. Some people are spiritually lazy, others are mentally lazy, and some are physically lazy. We cannot feel strong nor equal to the duties to which we are assigned if we are victims of laziness, a condition that always results from failure to use power in the right way. Let us examine the result of the right use of power on all three planes. We can trace the operation of the evolutionary principle in all forms of life, from the lowest creatures known to science up almost to the manifestations of divinity. Hence, we should be able to discern the reasons why evolution should take place. We are born with certain appetites and desires, also with instincts and a degree of intelligence that knows how to use those qualities in the right way. Some people say that the sense nature of man is not good, and that it must be overcome or repressed. Others insist that the intellectual side of man's being is of no consequence, that the spiritual side alone is important. Yet the fact remains that every phase of man's life, from the lowest sense plane to the highest spiritual plane, is a vital factor of his being. But its beneficence is dependent upon its right use. We know by instinct that it is essential to our growth that we should construct in one way or another. After a time, through this effort comes the development of intellect, by which man has power to think and reason. The physical should always be subordinate to the intellectual, for to the degree that man is intemperate in the indulgence of his passions, his mental force is reduced. Man knows that as he perseveres, he succeeds. He knows also that as he thinks clearly, concisely, and logically, he accomplishes his undertakings. Now, the mentally strong man will bring his force to bear on one thing at a time, not on many things at once. Thus will he become truly constructive. Besides the virtues of concentration, moderation, and perseverance, there are certain moral and ethical questions that affect the problem of life, and only as man considers them in their true relations can he hope to generate the highest power. He knows that aside from all thought of spiritual development, his mind is at peace only when he feels and acts justly towards others. He is endowed with a sense of justice, and only as he expresses it is his mind strengthened. For if he cultivates the habit of injustice, inharmony enters his mind, and thus weakens his mental capabilities. Or again, upon this plane of being, he may be in danger, by an extreme cultivation of his mental faculties, to look upon his mind with its powers of thinking, reasoning, and forming judgments as the highest attribute of his being. It is at this period in his life that he formulates creeds and becomes dogmatic in his religion. The thought of justice is a predominating one, but that justice is not always tempered with mercy. The most cruel things the world has ever known have not come from the man on the physical plane, but from the intellectually developed man, whose life was barren of love for humanity. Men who thought they were doing the will of God have perpetrated crimes in the name of religious creeds too fearful to contemplate. The intellectual plane of development is the great plane of unrest, of ceaseless activities. More mental and physical disturbances occur on this plane than on either the physical or spiritual planes. On this plane, man's desires become multiplied and the mind is never satisfied. Each gratified desire brings another want to take its place. The accumulation of knowledge does not bring contentment. In fact, it becomes rather a burden. We may acquire all possible knowledge of the outer life and yet be deficient in wisdom, for wisdom and knowledge are not the same. But when they are combined, the individual puts the knowledge he has to practical use. It is only through the right use of our knowledge that we become strong. When we utilize our possessions in the right way, greater possessions are acquired. Thus do we learn the true secret of power. Many people think that if they half starve themselves, or if they live on certain kinds of foods, or if they do or abstain from doing certain other things, they will bring about conditions that will tend to develop spirituality. But if one is right within, he will do everything right without. That is to say, a man that is pure in heart will be clean and whole in body. We need power on the physical plane. We need power on the intellectual plane. But most of all, we need power on the spiritual plane. For when we consciously enter the realm of spirit, our old life methods are entirely supplanted by the new. It is the spirit within us that contains the transforming power. The outer is but the instrument of the inner entity. Let us cease the useless effort to relate ourselves to the outer world, to people we think can aid us, or to things that we feel have benefited us, and let us seek that which shall bring the real abundance of life. Everything of value is within the realm of spirit, and we can get therefrom whatever we wish. We must get mental and physical health in the right way, through the recognition and development of our soul qualities. The man who fully realizes that he is living and moving in God can never express disease, because he has passed from under the law of sin and death, the law we ourselves have made, and has now come under the law of the Spirit of life, which gives freedom from all negative conditions and makes for health and power. He has come to see the light that has been shining in the darkness, the light that is to enlighten every man that cometh into the world, that light which is a spark of the divine presence in the life of man, which must eventually become a living flame. From the very center of being, the soul attributes of faith, hope, and love are pushing outward, demanding recognition. These qualities cannot be imaged in the mind, yet beautifying and uplifting, they lend tone and color to every thought picture until earthly things stand revealed in heavenly glory. This is the coming of the kingdom of God on earth, the transmutation of the self-will into the divine will, where man realizes his at-one-ment with God. From the altitude of the spiritual plane, everything is seen in a new light. Old things have passed away, and behold, all things have become anew. The law of evolution has ceased to act, and the soul has become a law unto itself. The soul stands revealed as the image and likeness of its creator, not a physical image, not a mental conception, but a spiritual consciousness endowed with divine faculties that shape reason, control thought, and perfect the physical organism. For if the spirit of him who raised up Jesus from the dead dwell in you, he that raised up Christ from the dead shall also quicken your mortal bodies by the Spirit which dwelleth in you. It is only from this plane that man perceives the unity of life, that he realizes that all life is one, and that he ceases to resist what is termed the evil of life and sets his face steadfastly toward the accomplishment of every undertaking through the power of good. He has risen above the turmoil and strife, so that while seeing them, he is not affected by them. Not that the heart has lost sympathy for the sorrow and distress existing on the other planes, but that a new consciousness has come which discloses the fact that all things work together for good. Sorrow and pain seem very real while one is passing through them. They are signals of distress showing a lack of adjustment, but they are not real or permanent conditions in the life of man. The suffering of the present time is not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. End of chapter 1. Please do take a second here and hit that like button. And if this is something that you feel that someone in your life might benefit from hearing, please do share it with them. And if you like what you see here on this channel, I invite you to subscribe. I'll meet you at the next video for chapter 2, Good and Evil.